How you gonna walk through this world? It's so easy to misstep. How are you gonna walk through the world? So easy to screw it up. You gotta rise like the sun does every day. Rise up, look above. The light feels something like love. Hello and welcome. I'm Shelley Leedahl, a multi-genre literary writer coming to you from Ladysmith on Canada's lovely Vancouver Island. When anyone's asked what my 12 books are about, I say they're about the human heart. You see, I'm kind of a fool for love, and if you are too, then you're in the right place. This is Something Like Love, an eclectic literary podcast that explores that wildest of animals, love, through various genres. Via short stories, poetry, serializations of longer works, and personal essays, I'll pull back the blinds to reveal the lives and loves of those braving the high seas of human emotion. First up are 10 edgy short stories featuring teens learning the hard way, as we do, about familial, platonic, and romantic love, and learning to love themselves on the journey. There'll be something new to listen to every Wednesday. Do you write too? At the end of each episode, I include a springboard exercise for anyone who feels like doing a bit of their own writing. One day, in the future, there may be a forum for listeners to share their work. Step by step, people. Old dog, new tricks. I've lived in various communities in all 3 Western provinces, but I grew up in 4 small Saskatchewan towns, Kyle, Turtleford, Wilkie, and Meadow Lake, and there were definitely characters in each of them. Sometimes the seed of a story begins with 1 or 2 characters, major or minor, and the plot of the story seemingly invents itself. What I like best about writing is when the metaphorical pen takes off as if it's on its own, and I'm just the woman holding it. You're about to hear episode 6 of Something Like Love. This is Shelley's story. She's about to make a difficult decision that she hopes will change the course of her life. Here is, besides, I Like the Rain. Roddy lived in the trailer park with his dad, his little brother, and a deaf-mute uncle with a buggered-up hand, and Shelley feared she loved him because he didn't have a mother. All this had started in grade 5, Mother's Day, to be exact, Roddy's first one without one. While everyone else was scissoring recycled ground beef platters into petal shapes and gluing the styrofoam into daisies, the wheezy teacher stacked a pile of Nancy Drews on Roddy's desk, poked 3 fingers into her cyclone of orange hair, and made a self-congratulatory clucking sound. There now, that should keep you busy, eh? Roddy squinted up at her through his crude blonde bangs as if she were speaking Bulgarian. Shelley fell for him right then and there, and she'd been falling for him ever since. That was 6 years ago, but here they sat, still in the same school, staring out the windows to the north yard with its vista of gravelled parking lot and the freaky forest beyond it. The south windows overlooked the baseball diamond, the swings and wooden plank seesaws that kids from generation to generation had bucked each other off of. There had been more concussions, cracked tibulas, and smashed teeth on account of those 2 seesaws than from accidents on the toboggan hill, skating rink, and diving board combined, and survivors wore their injuries like precious medals awarded only to members in an exclusive club. Shelley rested her chin on her folded hands and watched the wind bother the anemic aspens and silver sage bushes. The freaky forest, what the woods behind the school had been called since forever. It was one of those things nobody even thought about unless an outsider asked about its origin, but even then, all anyone did was shrug and say, "I don't know, just called that because." At the front of the classroom, Madame Bouchard was reciting a picnic list of food, oufs, moutarde, fèves en sauce, words they were expected to remember and care about. But Shelley was considering the day before and what her father now knew. Seemed Doc Rubinski, the infamous Einstein-haired local dentist, had spilled a few fèves in the Legion. Rubinski was perpetually tanked, but his word, slurred or not, had always been gold among the cronies in the dim, smoky recesses of the Legion. "I seen Shelley with that McPhee kid out behind the curling rink," he told the other serial drinkers, "and they wasn't just enjoying the view." Shelley's father wouldn't let it die. "Them McPhees never did have much more than a pot to piss in," he'd ranted, vigorously sawing into his pork chop, "and after the missus was taken by the cancer, things got a whole hell of a lot worse. Should have been doctoring, but Jeannie wasn't born with the sense God gave a dog. Bet she could have lasted at least a year if Harv hadn't taken her to the city for the chemo." He forked a piece of meat and jammed it into his mouth. "Christ, Mother, if I'd have wanted leather for supper, I'd have damn well asked for a shoe." Partially chewed bits of meat sprayed onto the table. Shelley saw that one fleck had stuck in the grizzly hair on her father's chin. Whisker rub, she thought, remembering the regular, years-ago scrape of his face against her own, the rawness after. "You can do a lot better than that one now, Laney girl," he'd admonished. "And don't you go playing doctor with that little weasel in the freaky forest, either. I don't want no snot-nosed McPhee for a grandkiddy, you hear?" What amused Shelley most was that her father set himself on a shelf so much higher than the McPhees. It was plain as pudding that they were only slightly better off themselves on account of her father's railroad pension. After he got himself released from his brakeman position with the CN for boozing on the job, they lived thinly on his pension and government assistance in their sawdust-insulated clapboard in Little Chicago, the area of town closest to the Indian Reserve and the rodeo grounds. Houses in Little Chicago were set widely and haphazardly apart, as if a tornado had picked them up and tossed them back on the ground wherever it saw fit. Battered half-ton trucks with web-cracked windshields, mousy upholstery and flat tires, broken-down stoves, trashed, pea-stained mattresses and mangled bikes rusted into the landscape of thigh-high quackgrass between houses. Town council never got around to approving streetlights or sidewalks for the area, and you had to be careful where you stepped because of the landmines of broken glass and dog crap. The bootlegger lived out there, and old Lady Graver, whom everyone thought was a witch. She'd chase after trespassers with a .22 if she caught them snooping around her grey-board shack with terry towels nailed over the windows. A character named Lockjaw wore Coke bottle-thick glasses and walked with hugely exaggerated, arm-swinging strides from one end of town to the other all day long. He owned another of the unfortunate shanties. Still, it wasn't the trailer park. That was worse. Shelley tuned her father out. His rage was getting old. All the people around her were getting old and crusty, she mused. Her parents were ancient. Her mother had been 41 when Shelley was born. Her dad closer to 50. "It's a goddamn miracle you wasn't born retarded," he'd been saying ever since she was old enough to understand speech. "Ain't that right, Mother?" A girl ran past the window, late for school. Shelley thought of a time when she was a girl, 12 maybe, with Roddy's initials scripted in purple ink on the bottom of her running shoes. They'd been learning about latitude and longitude. In the next row, Roddy had been smiling at her with his eyes, his legs crossed at the ankles, hands busy folding a paper into a fan. They'd kissed in the freaky forest at morning recess, and she'd told him there, beneath the brambles, that her heart had longitude. "I'll always love you, Roddy, and I'll always love you more," he said. The bell rang. Shelley closed her French book and the door to her childhood recollections. Roddy was waiting, backpack hooked over one shoulder, hair still swept across his eyes and slightly turned up at the ends, as if an eternal breeze followed him around. She knew the intricacies of bones beneath his shirt, the hard little knobs of his vertebrae, and the thumb-sized hollow in his chest where his ribs almost met. His legs were thinner than hers, with spongy blonde hair below the knees, but he had some height to him, and a soft, pink mouth like a girl. His eyes were the color of water in the shallow end of the pool when the sun shone on it, and his skin held on to a little of that sun all year round. Always been beautiful, Shelley thought, but she could see where strangers might look at him and think, malnourished, alley cat, doomed, even if they didn't know he was the bottle collector's son. He couldn't claim another friend in the world, and there'd been a few years through junior high school when he'd been badly bullied on account of his father's nefarious occupation, but mostly the other kids just avoided him like he had flesh-eating disease. Want to do something? He ran one finger down the length of her bare arm, making the hairs stand up. Go for coffee? Shelley shuffled her books from one arm to the other. How about a walk? It looks so fresh out there. Maybe we'll find some pussy willows if we head south along the tracks. Sure, he said, and Shelley noted how quick he was to agree, recognized how he'd always been that very same thing, willing. They started across the parking lot. A group in jean jackets and ball caps were huddled across Brock Richter's green sunfire. They were smoking a joint. Hey, Shelley, Brock called. Got something for ya. The other guys laughed and whistled between their fingers. They made remarks Shelley didn't let herself hear. It was best just to ignore them, she figured, although a few years ago she would have chased them all the way down Maine. When she caught them, she'd dig her nails into their freckled arms and give them a good hard knee bunt where the sun didn't shine. They'd grown past her now, filled out like good old farm boys, which is what most of them were. Farm boys who'd inherit their father's land and the houses they'd grown up in, and she didn't dare cross them anymore, or even meet the indifference in their eyes. I hate it when they bug you, Roddy said, and she felt his back stiffen beside her. I wish we could get the hell away from here and never come back. And how would we manage that, my prince? She wondered. You don't have a horse, a car, not even a bloody bicycle unless you used your old man's with the bottle wagon rigged up behind it. She didn't look at him, but responded, absently, Indecisive May showers had spotted the ditches with shallow puddles. Shelley remembered how fun spring used to be when they were kids, and the ditches turned into fast and dangerous rivers that old ladies warned them against. They'd test the depths with sticks and float paper boats in the gully behind the John Deere dealership, water sloshing over the tops of the black rubber boots even the rich kids wore. It never rained that much now, just like it never snowed the way it used to, but there was still mud. They crossed a wet patch, and when they reached the railroad track, she put her hand on Roddy's shoulder and balanced against him to scrape the mud out of the treads of her runners with a branch. Those your new shoes? Roddy asked. She sailed the stick into the air. Yep, don't look so new now. They entered the shadows behind the town elevators. Roddy pulled her into his arms and gave her a long, deep kiss, as if he'd been waiting all day just to do it. She pressed against him, liking the way it took only this to make him hard, though there'd be none of that today. Dad knows about us, she said, breaking away. Doc Rabinski saw us together. Roddy stepped back, his hands on her arms. Hell, you're not going to let anything that old drunk says bother you, are you? You know the stories. He pulled George Acaster's perfectly good molar and missed the one so cavity-riddled George could stick the eraser end of a pencil inside it. Still, Shelley said, staring at the ground between their bodies. Well, what did the old bastard say? Roddy asked. Shelley looked up. Which one? Roddy sighed. Your dad. He didn't think it was a very good idea. She'd leave it at that. Roddy continued walking along the track while she tagged a few steps behind. He clenched and unclenched his fists. The cuffs of his jeans were wet and mud had splashed up his left leg. She knew he'd come to school tomorrow in the same jeans, wiped, perhaps, but not washed. Shelley, it's a free friggin' world. Your dad can't tell you who you can and can't see. Roddy picked up a black rock and hucked it. Did you stand up to him? Shelley heard honking, a formation of Canada geese with one straggler working diligently to catch up. I really didn't have a chance, she said. He's so set in his ways. Hell, he'll probably drink himself to death by the time you and I are ready to... Ready to what? She wondered. She didn't know how to finish it. Ready to leave this shithole? Ready to get hitched? She wouldn't be ready for that for a long time. Maybe never. God, how she wanted to do things, have someone else's life. If all she had to look forward to were living out her days in the trailer park or in one of the low-income duplexes the government was slowly putting up around town, then God might as well strike her dead right then and there. Bring it on, she dared. I'm already halfway gone. We have to be more careful, she finally said. You still want to be with me, don't you, Shelley? You still love me. He'd stopped again, and she thought about puppies, how they run ahead, then stop and turn to be sure their masters are following. She automatically moved the hair from his eyes, then curled her hands around the back of his neck and pulled his forehead to hers until they were touching. Times like these, she wanted to sit him in her lap and stroke his hair like a child's. Course, baby. We just have to figure out a way. Weekends were the worst. She hated being at home with them. She hated her mother's worn-out house dresses and the decades-old aprons, pockets bulging with balled-up tissues, belly swelled beneath as if the old woman were 6 months pregnant. She hated the whistling noises her father made through his nose when he fell asleep in front of the big, ancient TV, brown and yellow Afghan molded over his legs. The sound reminded her of wind in the chimney. Why don't you have some of your girlfriends over? Her mother asked. She was sprinkling white flour on the countertop. A ball of sugar cookie dough waited in a bowl. You never see nobody no more. What about that Angela girl? Haven't seen her around for ages. Shelley was thumbing through a Reader's Digest, bored with trying not to cheat while she tested her word power. She was supposed to meet Roddy behind the elevators at 1 o'clock. Angela works at the co-op on Saturdays. I told you that already. And when she's not there, she's with Luke. Luke? Her boyfriend, you know, son of the Royal Bank manager. Her mom picked up a drinking glass and pressed the mouth into the dough. Shelley thought it resembled very pale flesh. Well, you've got other friends, her mother said. Don't be such a gloomy Gus. Shelley heard the squeak of her father's lazy boy against the hardwood as he tried to kick it out of recline into an upright position. She pictured him slamming his weight against the back of the chair, his beefy hands gripping the arms. Mother, how about a cup of tea? Sailboats in a sparkling bay. Restaurants with a real linen serviette to set in her lap. Skyscrapers and escalators and people in nice suits, everyone moving along with purpose to wherever they needed to be. These were the things Shelley thought about. She knew they existed, and that they were far beyond the fences of her own life. Someone shrieked beyond the window. Shelley turned. The Lalibirdy kids were whacking each other with broken badminton rackets. The one who always had a red and sore-looking nose slapped his brother on the behind. The brother wailed and twirled around, catching his sister on the shin. Shelley knew the 6-year-old could hold her own, but she didn't want to witness it, didn't want to be anywhere near it, or near her parents, or even near the walls she'd known from one lifelong nail hole to the next. I'm going out for a bike ride, she announced. But it looks like rain, her mother said, her voice just a few notes away from a whine. You'll catch your death of cold. I'll take a jacket, Mom. Besides, I like the rain. It's refreshing. What's that, Mother? Now Shelley heard her father walking stiffly across the floor and knew he'd be bent over as if looking for coins on the sidewalk after the first snowmelt. When he rose after sitting for a stretch, his legs needed a few minutes to warm up before they'd work properly. One day, she thought, I'll be pushing him to the Legion in a wheelchair. She was lacing up her shoes when he entered the kitchen. She said, I'm going for a bike ride, her mother said. She said, the rain is refreshing. By Christ, it is that now. Where'd you keep the GD tea bags in this house, eh? In the yellow canister beside the toaster where they've been for the last 30-odd years, Dad, Shelley said smartly. Jesus, you're getting a mouth on you, girl. You stay the hell away from that McPhee kid, you hear? Shelley closed the kitchen door and wrangled her bike out from between the freezer and the porch wall, lifting it over the weary collection of shoes parked on flattened cardboard. Her father was still condemning her when she left. There were 3 ways to leave town. North would take her past Mooney's restaurant and then Motel Hell, as everyone called it, a low-level unit where the occupants in one thin-walled room could hear the neighbors' cries of drunken ecstasy or pain in the next. South led past the cemetery and the drive-in that was no longer in use. East meant she'd have to ride on the main highway for about 1 kilometer before she angled off to the secondary highway, with bare, wet fields on either side and the occasional pothole to dodge. That would be the way to go, she decided. 3rd Avenue to Main, Main to Railway, and she was out of town. Shelley noticed the sound change as her tires left the smooth highway for the slightly pebbled secondary road, the latter creating a noise beneath her wheels like a week-old bandage being pulled off a scab. She stared into the distance. A purple ledge of clouds hung like a mirage in the eastern sky. The rain turned to a barely discernible drizzle, then it stopped, but there was still the breeze to deal with. Always the wind here, she thought. You can't escape it. She tied her hood strings beneath her chin and stretched the elasticized cuffs over her hands so that only her knuckles poked out. How long since I've ridden this way, she wondered. How long since I've done anything alone? A farm truck was approaching, and she moved over to the extreme right shoulder. The driver lifted his forefinger off the wheel as he passed. She nodded. She couldn't see his face beneath the cap. She rode toward Gerlinski's farm and wondered if they still had the Rottweiler, or if someone had finally had enough of the wretched animal and had shot it, or swerved into it when it took off after their car wheels. She stopped to pick up a few rocks and shoved them in her pockets, just in case. She approached the yard site, hidden behind a windbreak of grey spruce, and picked up her speed, aware of her thigh muscles as she punched the pedals harder. The muddy lane came into view, a truck in the driveway, then the white-sided house, and beyond it the outbuildings and hip-roofed red barn. But no dog. Thank the Lord for small miracles, she said aloud, and realized, grimly, that she was echoing the cross-stitch on her mother's kitchen wall. She kept on, toward the junction, past dry dugouts and grain bins and poplar bluffs that were just starting to burst into greenness. A herd of Hereford cows stood facing the same northeast direction. The air held a post-rain sweetness, and she swallowed mouthfuls of it, her cheeks and nose cool but not uncomfortable. She rode hard and felt her heart roaring beneath her jacket. Ah, the heart, she thought, weary with the effort of loving enough for 2 women. She was going to have to do something. The thought had only first come niggling toward her 3 weeks ago, while she'd been daydreaming through the hazy classroom window, eyes on the various trampled paths that led into the freaky forest. She loved Roddy, yes, but she wasn't in love with him any longer. It was a pitying kind of love. Big sisterish, she thought. Maybe love was just a fleeting emotion like any other, something one wove in and out of, something that unraveled of its own accord like an old sweater no one even wore. She stopped for a moment and blew her nose, then pushed off again. A hawk screeched and she followed it with her eyes, saw it dip into the field, a vole or mouse in its claws as it swept back toward the sky. I've got to tell him, today, she decided, and she felt her chest tighten with this thought, as if clamps were wrenching it apart. Her heart, it turned out, did not have longitude, after all. The road curved right, leading her into the face of the wind. Pedaling was real work now. The wind pushed a tumbleweed across the road and whistled past her ears like a long train to nowhere. The tumbleweed caught on a barbed wire fence and bucked there as if trying to release itself. She saw a shape ahead in the ditch. It could have been a pole. Then it became a figure on a bike. Then, as she cycled nearer, she recognized the trademark coveralls, a brown corduroy jacket, and curly-toed cowboy boots. Harv, Roddy's dad, flesh and blood of the flesh and blood she had loved since she was a hopscotch-playing girl. A child's yellow plastic basket was wired to his handlebars. A wooden cart, rigged up to a sawed-off hockey stick, was attached to his seat post in a miracle of rope and wire. He was holding a bottle of Budweiser by the neck, and he gave it a few shakes before setting it in his cart. He's not going to look at me, Shelley thought. He knows who I am, and he's not going to say a ding-dang thing. Ding-dang? Shit, that was her father's word, and it had no business entering her thoughts, none at all. "Hello," she called, answering her own dare, and lifted a hand to wave as she approached him. No need to be rude. "How's it going?" she asked. "Not bad," the man said, turning away as if she were an eclipse, and he knew better than to look. He was shorter than Roddy, and heavier. Shelley had no memory of Roddy's mom, Jeannie, but guessed that's who her boyfriend had inherited his height from. The man bent for another beer bottle. "Always lots after a Friday night, eh?" "Guess so," she said, and was suddenly aware that she was wobbling and had almost stopped. "Well, have a good one, eh?" He may have said something to her after that, but if he did, it belonged to the wind. Shelley turned off railway onto Main. She heard the pounding bass of Brock's car stereo, a booming she felt inside the bones of her skull before she saw the Sunfire parked in front of the liquor board store. An unfamiliar blonde was sliding on lipstick in the passenger seat. Must be the new girlfriend, she thought. There was a mirror glued to the visor. Shelley had looked into it, too. She only glanced now, but Brock had seen her. He didn't stare or taunt her. He hadn't said a word to her for one whole week. She turned off Main onto 3rd, past the school and decades of secrets that belonged to the freaky forest, feeling slightly woozy because of the long ride and the wind, because of what she'd done and what she was about to do. That was Besides I Like the Rain, written and read by me, Shelley Leedahl. Music? Well, you can blame that on me too. The story was produced by Zak Cohen. Do you have a character you'd like to explore? If you don't have one in mind, based on your current experience, your memory, imagination, or any other source of inspiration, you could use magazine, newspaper, or internet photos of strangers to get your imagination fired up. Create a challenge for that person. It could be an internal conflict, or it might be a problem with another character, a health issue, economic woes, guilt, fear, or something to do with love. Please join me next Wednesday for episode 7 of Something Like Love. The story, Thursday nights and Saturday afternoons, is told in interview style, and again, the female character has to deal with an issue that no young person should ever have to experience. The 10 stories in the Something Like Love series were made podcastable via the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Originals Grant Program, and I am grateful. How are you going to walk through this world? It's so easy to misstep.